Welcome back now to Text in English, pointed at the right way there, Poetry 2022 with me, Charlie Keeling. Today, we're going to continue to look at format in terms of poetry, thinking about how we're going to use it in primary education, particularly to develop literacy in young learners. So we've looked at rhyme, and we'll include some thoughts about those today. We've looked at rhythm, and we've looked at imagery, both physical, literal, sensory description, and figurative, including things like similes and metaphors, etc. Now, my friends, we're going to look at form. And you can see up here as well, Untitled is backed by Derek Bewley. Look at that, it's a poem. My goodness me, certainly is an experience and a sensation. And that's what poems are all about. Poems are about form. Most modern verse is not strict verse anymore. It's more likely to be free form and free verse. This, by my dear heart, let's point the right way, still getting it wrong, is fantastic. Let's have a read, shall we? Oh, I am my own way of being in view and yet invisible at once. Hearing everything you see, I see all of whatever you can have heard, even inside the deep silences of black silhouettes, like these images of furry surfaces, darkly playing cat and mouse with your doubts about whether other minds can ever be drawn from hiding and made to be heard in inferred language. I can speak only in your voice. Are you done with my shadow? That thread of dark word can all run out now and end our tale. Hush, good Lord. I think it's by a dear heart. It's called The Concrete Cat. It's a very good example of what's known as a concrete poem or shaped poem, part of visual poetry. And probably the wrong way around here. I think concrete poems, shaped poems are excellent ways to start young learners off. This was sort of a dark and weird meta, self-reflective journey into sort of perception, inferred language. There's no punctuation in it, as you can see above. So the question has no question mark, and then it refers to its own tail as it conflates that with the tail of the cat at the end. Excellent piece of work. Probably not for primary, but still quite interesting in terms of what it's doing with the format. We're going to look over there at different forms of poetry, thinking about free-form poetry. And I'm going to introduce a list poem, which is a very simple way of looking at a poem. We saw it in Poetry Pie. I'm going to look at another type of list poem, an I am poem. Excellent way to start writing poetry, both of those two. More text-based, but if we then bring in visual images, we're going to look at a Japanese form called haiku, which often in schools is combined with a visual text to make it an excellent starting text for poetry. And of course, where I started, acrostics, where you list down a word and then either put single words or lines to make a poem. So you only need a limited vocabulary to exercise it, a little bit like puzzle solving, and shaped poems, rather like the concrete cat above me. So let's have a little look first. What I've tried to do is to introduce some poets as we go through some of these ideas. And one that's always been in toilets, basically, toilet shelves next to some loos when I've grown up is the British poet John Hegley. A bit coffee, sorry, don't have any water. Here's his collection, All the Best, an important sort of phrase in British English, all the best. And you can also check him out over there with his version of this, which is much better than mine, because he knows the poem, and I will read it here for the first time. He explains in that video, he found it very hard to explain what a poem is, so it's easier to explain what a poem's not. And this is a great teaching tactic. You can't be wrong if you're saying what something isn't, what something's not, or something that is premeditatedly wrong. A poem is not an ant, but it can be quite short. A poem is not a banana, but there may be something under its skin. A poem is not a coat, but it may have warmth in it. A poem is not a dog, but it might be quite a friend. A poem is not an endless pair of trousers, but it can be quite long. A poem is not a football shaped like a cucumber. A poem is not a great number of things. A poem is not a hedgehog, but it might be hard to get hold of. A poem is not an igloo, but it can feel like home. A poem is not a jumble sale, but it might contain some rubbish. A poem is not a kite, but it might enjoy the wind. A poem is not a light bulb, but you can change it if you want to. A poem is not a monkey, but can be quite human. A poem is not a nut, but you can give it to a monkey. A poem is not an opera score or an open score, but it can be revealing. A poem is not a prison, and it shouldn't feel like one either. A poem is not a question. Actually, it is sometimes. A poem is not a radio, but you may have to tune into it. A poem is not a slot machine, but you may have to put something in it. A poem is not a toothbrush, so don't clean your teeth with it. A poem is not an umbrella, but it can give you protection. A poem is not a verruca. Ow, I'm glad. A poem is not a wig, but maybe it will change you. A poem is not an X-ray. Make no bones about it. A poem is not a year-old bag of vegetables, but it can smell quite strongly. A poem is not a xylophone, and it can spell words wrongly. Lovely. So what we've got there is a classic list poem using an excellent device. A poem is not what something isn't, because then you can say anything. It's a list poem as well, importantly, in the sense that it starts off with repeated words, but it's also a list poem in the sense that it's got ant, banana, coat, dog, endless pair of trousers. What a fantastic image that is. Love that visual image there of just unending trouser legs going down into eternity. Football, great, hedgehog, igloo, jumble, sail, kite, light bulb, etc. So another very clever way of including that. We've got a teacher is, and something beginning with A. A teacher is, well, I don't know what you thought of with A, an academic. So again, another way of sort of quantifying and making it soluble, more problem solving as well. And an excellent way to interact and use with vocabulary, glossaries, etc. Lexis, different subsets of things. I like to think about animals, for example, or environments, or school, family. But also, as we can see here, an endless pair of trousers. It can lead to creativity, an expression that maybe is totally unexpected, because I don't think he ever planned that, but what a wonderful image that is. I will take that with me to the grave. Then I mentioned here's Joseph Corlo's Werewolf Club rules. There it be, lovely. This is potentially not for primary, it's a bit of a higher language level, but it's a very good example of an I am poem, and it's I am a writer. You can watch him on the video over there as well, and he describes how he does workshops at secondary schools and how he uses this as well. And variations of an I am poem can be used from very simple, write 3 sentences with I am, to develop it, and you develop it from there to get sort of some form of expression. So let's have a look at this. I am the clash and collide of the stars because I create worlds. I am the awareness of the trees because I hear the wind. I'm the sweat of a rainbow because I refract all the colors. I'm the blood in a pen because I ink arteries. I am the blade in a sharpener because I make nibs vanish. I am the edge of a rubber, rounded, worn, and softened by mistakes. I'm the conversation of notes, discussing melodies. I'm the holes in a flute, knower of unknown tunes. I'm the skin of a drum, every hit, beat, and bang bouncing off me, forming music from nothing. Yes, sorry, that was it. There we go. Fantastic. I love that. Lots going on. Very simple rules here as well, because we don't need in an I am, we don't have to, it's up to us. We don't need rhythm and rhyme schemes or meter here if we don't want to. We've got a set form, a formulaic language, I am something. And here we've got I am the, basically, through every sentence. We've got some really interesting bits of clash and collide for a lovely bit of alliteration. Clash and Collide of the Stars, because I create worlds, another C there as well, and lots of repeated S and sh sounds. I'm awareness of the trees because I hear the wind. Awareness of the trees, personification or anthropomorphization. It's sort of putting human qualities into the trees, what we described as pathetic fallacy. When we did Gothic, because I hear the wind, so we've got sensory description, sounds, clash and collide, we've got sounds, then we go for this very sort of physical, tactile, the sweat of a rainbow. Where did that come from? That's insane. The sweat of a rainbow. What a striking image that is, because I refract all the colors. But the fact that rainbow sweats, perspires from doing it is quite an interesting idea. And then we've got refraction, a process. So we've got a very visual image on top of this sort of very sort of kinesthetic and tactile image of sweating. Lovely poem. Really interesting. I am the skin of a drum. I love also, we're looking at the lines of the conversation of notes discussing melodies as well. So music is then personified as a person in conversation and discussion. Very interesting use. I am the holes in a flute, knower of unknown tunes. Excellent use of language, very interesting. Looking at that structure though, the I am can be used for a very simple poem here all the way through to secondary. Moving on, so we don't get too long in our bite size. This is getting a bit longer, isn't it? I love haiku, and you can see above me, I love this as well. The S in spring with a capital P. Spring is here today. Spring is here today. 5 syllables. The sun is shining so bright. 7 syllables in line 2. The bees are buzzing. 5 syllables. We have haiku, ladies and gentlemen. So haiku, 17 syllable poems. Excellent way of thinking about pronunciation, stress, rhythm in language. But also, as you can see up here as well, widely used to combine visual and verbal elements in a text here as well. Haikus are sort of separate lines. There's a thought in each one. It's a moment of time, and it sort of describes the natural world traditionally that you could do a haiku about anything, of course. But here, this is an excellent start in primary as well. Simple, rules to follow, limited vocabulary, simplicity of expression, and this strong visual element, which gives you a picture, as you can see above here as well. This will probably be in years 1 or 2. And so it's an excellent place to start in terms of poetry, bringing in sort of arts and crafts as well. Takes me to our final ones to look at here today. Again, something freeform poetry. We've had a look as we've gone through. You've seen lots of examples from the penguin, the emperor penguin. We've had the concrete cat. We had the bees swarming out of the beehive in Jörg Pittinger's work. So we've had all sorts of forms of concrete or shape poems, visual and verbal text combined. In haiku, they're sort of almost, are they iconotext or are they separate? In a concrete or shape poem, the text often creates the picture, as we've seen in the examples above, or the picture contains the text, which is a very good starting place in primary. We can see above here as well, the other thing that I'd love for you to try out and think about is the acrostic poem. Again, it's got this element of verbal and visual text, both up there as well, hasn't it? Which is great. So we can do some coloring in, we can do some drawing, we can work with spelling and pronunciation. Here we've got fall, F-A-L-L. This is obviously American, fresh, apples, lots of colors, leaves falling down. Just going to step back so I can get that correct there for you. Lovely acrostic poem as well. Not too far away from haiku. Lots of, look at the lovely practice done here for writing in best there as well. Isn't it beautifully done? Excellent piece of work. Really strong starting point as well in primary, early years appropriate. And so we've looked through that. We've looked through acrostic poems. Please be trying this. Concrete and shape poems, and there's lots of those elements, those paratextual elements coming up and visual elements. in our reading lists. We've also had a little look at an I am poem, which is a form of a list poem, which is another excellent starting place for primary poetry. So get yourselves out there, get poetrying. Sorry, best I could come up with as I improvise. This has been me, Charlie Keeling, doing this, Text in English, Poetry in 2022. Stay safe.